Welcome to week 2 of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, where I go over my favorite decks in the standard meta. And I like to start things off, if I can, with a budget build. And this week we have a budget mono-white build by J2S Josh. And it's all cards from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It was from the Midweek Magic Constructed event that we had on Wednesday. And it's basically just a bunch of the cheap one-cost flyers like Rune Lurker Bat, Miner's Guidewing, Deconstruction Hammer to give it +1/+1 and destroy any pesky artifacts. Family Reunion for all creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn after going wide. It's a good way to finish your opponent. The Iron Paw Aspirant can buff up one of the flyers, the Guidewing or the Bat. Got Petrify for cheap removal. Thousand Moons Crackshot. After you've developed the board, you can pay 3 to tap one of your opponent's blockers and help continue to push damage. Vanguard of the Rose, which has been a nice aggressive creature, a 3/1 where you can tap one colorless and sacrifice another creature or artifact. Vanguard of the Rose gains indestructible until end of turn, and then you tap it. Guardian of the Great Door, after going wide, you can tap, as an additional cost, you have to tap 4 untapped creatures or artifacts or lands that you control, so you can get this out for very cheap and apply good pressure to your opponent. Tinker's Totes is 3 cards in 1, so it helps us get to the Guardian of the Great Door. And then we've got the Malamet War Scribe, which gives all of the creatures you control +2/+1 until end of turn. This is not a deck that I recommend trying to grind all the way to Mythic. It is something, though, that you can put together if you've done a couple of drafts, because it's all commons and uncommons and no rares. So if you need to get some dailies done, this has been I tried it in the Midweek Magic event, and I really liked it. And we've gotten some information on best of 3 since we've completed a standard challenge. And first place goes on November 18th, goes to Azorius Soldiers by Rem F. And it's very similar to the one, if we compare it to the one that I covered in week 1, we can see that they decided not to go for the 4 copies of the Sanguine Evangelist, which is the 2/1 that is, when it comes into play, you create a bat token. When it dies, you put a bat token. It has Battle Cry. And they decided to lean more heavily into the soldier synergies. They did decide to keep the 2 copies of Malcolm, the Alluring Scoundrel, because if your opponent does not answer this, it just runs away with the game. And but we do have the 3 copies of Harbin, the Vanguard, 2 copies of the Werefox Bodyguard, 1 copy of the Virtue of Loyalty, and 2 Cavern of Souls, since the majority of stuff that we are playing is supposed to be a soldier. There's a fair amount of non-soldier things, so human might actually be better for this deck. But anyway, only down to 1 copy of the Restless, or no Restless lands whatsoever. So we cut the 2 copies of the Restless Anchorage, and this is a best of 3 deck, so they're running 1 copy of Surge of Salvation, a Destroy Evil, 2 Lantern Flares, Lauren of the Third Path, 2 copies of Wandering Emperor, 2nd copy of Destroy Evil, 2 copies of Get Lost, which has been pretty good removal, and then 3 copies of Protect the Negotiators, and 2 copies of Takashia's Welcome. And for the third one, Esper Midrange looks like the deck to beat in best of 3 right now. This one was the list by a 2-0 star, who won 2nd place on November 18th, but the same list also won 1st place on November 19th by the Manland, and 2nd place on November 19th by Duke 12. So definitely a deck to look out for in best of 3. And if I compare this to the list that I covered during week 8 for Esper Midrange, we can see that they are running 2 less copies of Dinnik, so down from 4 copies to 2, no copies of Shieldred the Apocalypse, which if you don't know what that is, it's a 2 and 2 black for a 4/5 death touch that when you draw a card, you gain 2 life and your opponent loses 2 life. Absolute bomb. And instead we've got some more interactions. So we've got Deep Cavern Bat, 4 copies of that, which is a card from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's a 1/1 flying lifelink for 2, but when it enters the battlefield, you look at your opponent's hand and you can exile a non-land from it until Deep Cavern Bat leaves the battlefield. So this really gives you nice early hand information, as well as some takes out some of the interaction of your opponent. And we've got the 2 copies of the Fairy Mastermind, which we've seen come and go throughout the weeks. 2 copies of down 2 copies of the Urtai Resurrected. Some lists were, up 2 copies of the Urtai Resurrected. We've seen this one also come and go. Kind of depends on whether or not you need a creature that is also interaction. And then down 2 copies of Destroy Evil. And I'm a little thrown off right now because I got a new mic, so sorry if the audio is a little funky. I'm used to having a headset on, so my voice sounds weird. Okay, we've got 2 copies of Go for the Throat, and down 2 copies from 4, and then we've also taken out 2 copies of Make Disappear, and running 1 copy of Get Lost, and 2 copies of the Subterranean Schooner. So a little bit less interaction, more threats, and this is also a best of 3 sideboard. We've got a 3rd copy of the Cut Down, 2 Disdainful Strokes, a Negate, Wandering Emperor, 2 Shieldred of the Apocalypse. So Shelly's in the sideboard. You could probably bring her main if you wanted to, at least in best of 1. Duress for if you're up against the control decks, Destroy Evil, another copy of Disdainful Stroke, Anoint with Affliction, Knockout Blow, and Path of Peril. All right, the 4th list that I'd like to cover this week is Boros Humans. Some are calling it Boros Aggro, but I think I like to call this one Boros Humans. And this one is by Hamuda. It won 3rd on November 18th in the Standard Challenge. And if we compare this to the mono white list, which is its closest counterpart, from week 1 of Lost Caverns of Ixalan, from last week's video, it's running 2 copies of Lunarch Veteran, down 1 copy of the Warden of the Inner Sky, so just running 2 instead of 3, no Intrepid Adversaries, up 2 Kellen Daring Travelers, and we're starting to see this one a little bit more. It gives you good dig for additional threats, as well as just being a 2/3 body for 2, and it's a human. We've got Inti, which whenever you attack, you may discard a card. You put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains Trample. And then whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card until your next instep. So this gives you good pressure and good dig. And we've got no copies of Brutal Cathar. So instead of the 4 copies of Brutal Cathar, we're going for Get Lost. And I do think we're going to see more and more of this card, because giving your opponent 2 map tokens to eliminate their best threat for 2 at instant speed is just very good. Down 2 copies of the Sanguine Evangelist, and no copies of the Knight Errant of Eos, and instead topping it off with Anem Pakal, Thousandth Moon, which is a 1/2 whenever you attack with 1 or more non-gnome creatures. Put a +1/+1 counter on a non-Pakal, then create X 1/1 colorless gnome creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on a non-Pakal. So with like NT, you can get additional counters on there. And this just is a very nice human deck. So of course we're going to be running the Cavern of Souls. You're going to see Cavern of Souls basically in any list that is running any tribal list. So we've got the humans here, and Cavern of Souls is an excellent fit. And then it is best of 3, so we've got the 2 copies of Elspeth's Might, Anointed Peacekeeper, Extraction Specialist, which, similar to mono white, you can use to bring back Thalia or Coppercoat Vanguard and can be really annoying for your opponent. Wandering Emperor, Destroy Evil, Invasion of Gobakon, Wedding Announcement, 3 copies of Wedding Announcement. And the last list is another, the last list of best of 3 is a Azorius Midrange by Sticky Wicket. And this one's kind of fun because it's going away from what the Esper Midrange deck was trying to do with like Rafine, and instead just going for a more consistent mana base with just white and blue. So if we compare this to the Esper Midrange from just earlier in this same video, you can see there's been a couple of changes. So we've got 3 copies instead of 2 of Wandering Emperor. We've got 2 copies of the Warden of the Inner Sky for a little bit more early game pressure, as well as the Spyglass Siren. And then we've got 1 copy of the Dust Legion Duelist, which works well with the map tokens off of Siren, or any of the +1/+1 counters, really. We've got 3 copies of Dinnik, 1 less copy of Malcolm, so just running a single copy of Malcolm. But we've got 3 copies of the Kitesail Larcenist, which is a new one from Lost Caverns. It's a 2/3 for 3 flying ward 1 creature that can turn something on your field into a treasure token or something on their field into a treasure token until it leaves the battlefield. And then we've got 2 copies of Destroy Evil because we don't have the black. We don't have the cut downs and such, so running 2 copies of Destroy Evil, as well as 1 Soul Partition, which can bounce something and make it cost 2 more. And then we've got the Subterranean Schooner, all the way up to 4 copies of Subterranean Schooner. So this deck, this card has been quite good in limited, and I bet we're going to see it in popping up here and there in certain constructed decks, just because it applies good pressure as a 3/4 vehicle for 2 with only crew 1, and then whatever crews it becomes a bigger threat over time. It's really great to pump your Dinnick. It's really great to pump your flyers. You can put a +1 counter onto Duelist with Explorer, and so it's just got some really cool synergies. And but we are deciding to cut the black, so we have no Deep Cavern Bats, no Fairy Mastermind. I guess that one's not black, but no Fairy Mastermind, no Rafine, no Urtai Resurrected, no cut downs, no Go for the Throats. But we are able to run 4 Restless Anchorages, and this is really one of the biggest payoffs to ditching black, is that we can run more of the manlands that are specific for just white and blue. And then this is best of 3, so we've got 2 copies of Elspeth's Smite, Negate, Lauren of the Third Path, Werefox Bodyguard, 2 copies of Boonbringer Valkyrie, another copy of Destroy Evil, 3 copies of Invasion of Gobakon, 2 Disdainful Strokes, a Negate, and a Knockout Blow. And I don't want to just do best of 3. I do like to cover best of 1 as much as I can, and we're starting to see some early data on best of 1. So when I checked, it was the top contender, or the top leading deck type or archetype was Mono White Humans. And if we compare this to the one that we looked at in week 1 last week, we can see that it's pretty close to what the brew speculations were going to be. We're missing 4 copies of Intrepid Adversary, and in place of it, we've decided to bump up the Sanguine Evangelist to 4 copies instead of just 2. And then 2 copies of Ossification for a little additional interaction with our opponent. And Selesnya Enchantments has been doing very well in best of 1. It was the 2nd performing archetype, and this is one that, if we compare it to week 7 during the Wilds of Eldraine, there are no changes. It is just 100% the same exact deck. So I thought I'd just boost this one back in case you were unaware of it. It is doing very well, and especially as people are trying to figure out new things in best of 1, you can catch people off guard with a very linear, very aggressive strategy, and this deck can just pop off. And then Weaver being able to copy a ossification and things like that, you can really disrupt your opponent's plays as well. All right, and last but not least, we've got Mono Red. And Mono Red did not get much from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I have seen a couple of lists running Dreadmaw's Ire. I'm not 100% sure that it's better than the Monstrous Rage. And this one was the top performing deck, and I like where they landed with this. If we look at it compared to week 10 of Wilds of Eldraine, we can see that there have been a couple of changes. So there's 1 Charming Scoundrel in here, which I thought was interesting. If you play this with an empty hand, you do get to draw a card, and being able to give a +1 Wicked roll to your Phoenix Chick, I have liked. So I think it also is another thing that triggers Godric. There's a couple of other cards that trigger Godric that this list decided to go down on, and so it's kind of interesting to see that they decided to keep 1 Charming Scoundrel. Also decided to increase Feldon from 2 to 3, and then the legendaries Squee and Godric both got knocked down from 4 copies to 3. And I think this is really just to prevent those rounds where you have multiple copies of a legendary and you're unable to play it because you already have a legendary in play. And I think for that same reason, they've decided to go down 1 on Sokenzan as well. Instead of running 2 copies, they're just running 1. And then still just 2 Mishra's Foundries, same amount of lands. So thank you for joining me this week. If you enjoy these things, I do them every week. Remember to hit like and subscribe. I also post my draft guides, my podcast, No Rares Required, which I've just recently put onto multiple podcast platforms. And I've also been posting things like the Arena Open. At the time of this recording, I made it into day 2, but have yet to see how I will actually do in day 2. So if you're competing in the Arena Open, I wish you luck as well. And I will be back next week to cover my favorite decks in Standard. Maybe I'll catch you on the ladder.